Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of MI for Change. I'm your host, Dr. Monica Gilbert. And today we're going to talk about something that I find very interesting and needed during your sessions, more so for those of us that like structure. Have you ever thought about, well, how do I structure my parent coaching session? Or how do I structure my session with a client? Do I just go wherever they go? Do I take on the power and tell them where to go? Like, how does that work? Today, we're going to talk about the four processes of motivational interviewing. And this is a way to guide your conversation. So, when you are using the ORs, which are the foundational skills of motivational interviewing, you are using them in a way that corresponds with the phase that you are in with that client. Think about perhaps working with a child. When you first start working with a child and you arrive at the home, you don't just get to business and start working on the different types of interventions. The first thing you have to do is build rapport. You want to build rapport with the client, establish yourself as a reinforcer, and really gain that trust. And a lot of the times we're thinking about gaining the client's trust and building that rapport with the clients. But how about the other way around? We as therapists also have to feel like we trust the environment, like we feel comfortable in that conversation that we are having or in that interaction that we're having. So rapport really works both ways. So when we first meet a client, we establish ourselves, we build that rapport, and then we start focusing on the specific programs that we want to work on. And later on, we want to evoke. We want to see if they are able to respond to some of these SDs or some of these questions that we have, if they are responding the way that we taught them. And then at the end, we want to check in and have a plan for generalization. So when we are speaking, when we are communicators and communicating either with our adult client or communicating with a parent for parent coaching, whatever it is, there are four processes or four phases that we generally go through. So, the four processes of motivational interviewing, the first one is engage. So, engage is basically building rapport and building that relationship, establishing that relationship with that client that you're working with. And in motivational interviewing, engage is known as the high phase or the high stage because this is what we want to start with. Again, you don't want to necessarily just go ahead and start with the other, evoking and everything else if you haven't clearly established this high phase with your client. You want to make sure that you are creating a safe, trusting space, showing that genuine curiosity. And I emphasize genuine because, as I've said before, if it doesn't feel real to you, then don't do it because it's just going to look weird. So, you want to make sure that you are communicating that genuine curiosity. You want to know what the challenges are and really communicate all of this with empathy. When we speak about the ORs, and if you've missed that episode in my MI episodes, that these are the foundational skills of motivational interviewing. So it may be good for you to go back to that episode and kind of get a refresher of what these ORs are. So when we're looking at the ORs, the open-ended questions, affirmations, the reflections and the summarizations, we are going to use them differently through these four phases. So again, number one phase is engaging. We are engaging. When we are using open-ended questions here, we are going to use them in order to gather information and build rapport. Maybe a question I can ask if I'm working with a client or a parent would be, tell me a little bit about past interventions that you've tried. How has it gone? Have they worked? Have they been successful? What are some challenges you have found with these interventions? Again, we want to gather this, I guess you can say, vocal baseline to see what has been working and what has not been working. We don't want to try something that is not working. And really, our goal here is to engage with that client, for them to see that we are curious and that we want to see their point of view. So that is the engagement. When we're using reflections, we are going to use reflections in order to reflect back at what they're saying. So, wow, it seems like you were really frustrated that that intervention didn't work, or wow, that therapist said that. I'm sure that made you a little angry. So you want to side by side with client, even if you're engaging in a bunch of counter change talk or sustain talk, that is fine in this phase because again, we want to engage. The second phase or the second process of motivational interviewing is focus. So when we are focusing, and that is after we engage properly, when we are focusing, we want to narrow down the interventions. We want to narrow down the goals. A lot of the times when I'm supervising or collaborating with other clinicians, one thing that I find is that they feel like they're working on a lot of different things, but they're not working on anything at all. And that tells me that they aren't focusing. So there's this really cool focus map that I like to use with my clients in this phase. And what we're going to do, and for those of you who have this visual aid and are seeing me, you can see it. If not, I'll try to describe it in the best of my abilities. So you'll put ovals or six circles, however you want to do it. The number is really arbitrary. You can put four circles, whatever it is. If you're looking, I just grabbed a random postcard, but just so you can see it. So I would make these six bubbles. And then what I'll do is that I'll ask them, okay, so what are some things you want to focus on during our session? And as they're telling me, I'm writing it down. So let's say the parent that you're working with is telling you, well, little Jimmy is not listening to me. Okay. Jimmy listening to you. Let's say the parent now says, and the school, the teacher really doesn't understand what to do. Okay. Teacher doesn't understand. And I also want him to say more words and speak more clearly. Okay, so speak more clearly. And I also want him to pay attention when crossing the street. Okay, pay attention. And I would also like to become more tolerant when he is engaging in these tantrums in front of everyone. Become more tolerant. And let's say that they don't have anything else and you have an extra circle. You can always input things. So you can always say something like, I noticed that when he's eating, it's really difficult for him to stay seated. He's running everywhere. He's not really eating his whole meal. Is that something that you think we should add here and we can work on? Yeah, sure. Okay. So then I'll add it. So now I have this sort of schedule type of frame where we can go over all of these things. Okay. So this is called mapping, and it is used very often in motivational interviewing. And this is a way to stay organized, to stay focused. And when the conversation deviates a little bit, again, you can use summarizations to bring it back. So, as you mentioned, Mom, it's really important for you to see me collaborating with teachers because you feel like the teacher is not understanding. And we can definitely come back to this. Is it okay if we come back to these other topics that we were writing down? Sure. And then you bring her back. So, that's a nice summarization and redirection back to the bubbles or the map that you've been working on. So that's a little tip, a little technique you guys can use in this phase, which is a focusing phase. So the focusing phase is also known as the what phase because we want to know what we are working on. And it's important that it is clear for everyone what it is that you're working on so that it doesn't deviate. Um, so be also flexible because sometimes you may be in a conversation with the client and the client tells you, oh, now I remember I really wanted to work on this instead of this. It's okay. We don't have to stick to the agenda map that we have. We can be flexible and also work on other things. Also, offer a menu of options. We all know that certain behaviors have certain functions and certain interventions work best for this behavior, but the way that you get there may be different, and that's okay. So, offering a menu of options of different things that can be done in order to tackle these problem behaviors that are going on. The third phase of this process is the evoke phase. And I like to put a little emoji fire on this Evoke phase because oftentimes I don't see that clinicians are doing this enough. And this is such an important phase because, again, I've spoken about burnout in the past, and burnout is very prevalent in both the behavior and psychology field because we're helping people, we're working with people. And sometimes we want to help more than what they want to do. And that's where the burnout happens. So, this evoke phase allows us to take a step back to evoke these solutions from our clients. We are not working so hard, they are, which is what really should happen. So, this evoke phase is the why. So, why are we doing this, or what are some things that we can work on? So, the heart of motivational interviewing, again, is drawing out the client's own motivation and listening for desire, ability, reasons, need. If you heard my last podcast, we spoke about that darn cat and really like focusing on it and reinforcing it. So when we are using the ors during the evoke phase, when we are using the open ended questions, we're going to ask questions like, tell me a little bit about what you think we can do to tackle this problem behavior he's having. So, again, you want, by asking this, you're evoking the solution from the client. Let's say they say, I have no idea. That's why I'm here. I'm here to see you. Yeah, that can happen. Well, you can respond with, yeah, well, is it okay if we brainstorm together some possibilities and some interventions, and then you can tell me which one works best for you? So, again, that person tried to pull away, and I brought him back, and I emphasized that we are doing this together. And that way, you can evoke those solutions from the client. So, you aren't doing all of the work. One of the techniques that you can use is the scaling question or the scaling questions. So, on a scale from 1 to 10, how ready are you to start tackling this behavior? Or from a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you right now to tackle these behaviors or these habits that you've been seeing? Once the person tells you a number, let's say they say, I don't know, 6, then you're going to ask the question, you mentioned a 6. What would it take for it to get to a 9? So when you emphasize that larger number, for example, in terms of importance, they're going to tell you all of the thing or all of the reasons or what it really takes for that to become a more important in behavior in their minds. For example, let's say you're working with a parent and you ask the parent, okay, in terms of important, how important is it for you from 1 to 10 for you to be able to manage these tantrums outside of your house? Let's say the parent says, I'll say a 5. Okay, mom or dad, you chose a 5. What would it take in terms of importance for that to go from a 5 to a 9? Well, I guess it would be more important for me if he was doing that in the playground and he wasn't able to relate to other kids, or maybe he was doing that at school and then the teachers were calling me all the time. So now the parent is telling you that for that behavior to be a priority or a more important behavior in their eyes, it has to get to that point. There's so much to work on with that information, so much that we can work on. Um, and then in terms of ready, you can also ask a scaling question. So from 1 to 10, how ready are you to start tackling this behavior? I would say a 3. Okay. Well, you said a 3 in terms of readiness. What would it take for it to reach a 10 or a 9 in terms of readiness? Remember, the number is arbitrary. We just want a higher number. Now they're going to tell you everything that they need from you. Well, maybe if I had an intervention that I saw worked, or maybe if I tried something and I saw that it was effective, then I would start to really try, or I would feel more confident in my readiness to really tackle this behavior. The same examples you can use with when you're working with the client directly and they're telling you that there's a behavior that they want to tackle, a behavior that they're trying to get rid of, or a behavior that's causing them a lot of challenges. You can use the scaling questions. All right. So, um, that is the focus. And now we're going to go to the fourth phase. And the fourth phase is the planning phase. And this is where you actually move towards action. The previous phase is focusing on what we're going to work on, it's the preparation part. And then the planning phase is when we're like, all right, let's start taking action. So instead of just thinking about change, here we're actually doing, we're actually engaging in that change. And what the person really needs in this situation is that support of their autonomy. So you can do it. Let's do it together. You come up with great ideas. So using a lot of these affirmations during this phase in order to encourage them and continue to keep them motivated. Something you can ask is, what's the first small step you'd like to try? So what is one step you want to try? I was doing a parent coaching session with two parents, I would say about a couple months ago. And the mom was really engaged and she had brought dad almost like, I think just carrying him to the session almost. And he was sort of like, crossing his arms. He didn't want to really be there. And at the end of the session, after we had that conversation, dad seemed more motivated. Like he got it. We built in really good rapport. There was that engagement. But he wasn't doing it yet. So he wasn't there still. And I asked him and I said, "Well, what's one small thing from everything we went over during this 1 hour session? What's one small thing that you are comfortable doing or starting this week?" And he said, "Well, you know what? I think I'm going to start whenever he yells or whatever, I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to try to cope myself and I'm not going to yell back," which is what I was doing. Perfect. Perfect. That is already a commitment towards that change. So these are important questions that you can ask to really get that commitment towards change. And it can be something small. It can be one small step. Um, Also, something else that you can bring up during this planning phase, again, is says planning, but we're really moving towards that action. We really want to get more of those actionable steps. So you would be using open-ended questions and also reflections. So sometimes, even though parents or clients are in this planning phase, they're still a little ambivalent about taking that first step. So they're kind of like, I want to, I understand it, I see the benefit of it, but it's just hard for me to move forward. It's just, I have all these challenges, all these things going on. So using a double sided reflection, for example, you mentioned that these are very hard steps for you to take right now. And you've also been mentioning during our session that you would like for your child to start going to birthday parties with other kids. So, what do you think is one actionable step or something that you can do right now towards that goal? Again, I highlighted the challenge, which was these are a lot of things I have to work on. It's really hard. And I also highlighted and I ended with that motivation towards change, which was, but I really want my child to start interacting with kids and being invited to birthday parties. So, what is one thing that we can start doing? And again, this is sort of like a mix of plan with evocation as well during this phase. But it's really that when you feel like you're already at this phase, it's about this really like small nudge. You want to kind of, okay, this is, I'm going to walk with you through this. A client of mine a couple years ago said something that I found very interesting, and I said something along the lines of, well, I am your therapist, and at the end of the day you are the one that's going to take the first step. And my client said, which was really clever and I've used it until this day, and he said, well, yes, you are going to take me close to the door. You're going to show me how to open the door, but it's up to me to turn the knob and walk through it. And I said, yes, absolutely. That's what it is. So oftentimes we tend to learn more from our clients than they learn from us. And that is an incredible thing. So Anyways, going back to these four phases of, or these four processes of motivational interviewing. So again, we are engaging, we are focusing, we are evoking, and then we're planning. And this, I always get this question of, well, how long should we engage for? Do we spend 20 minutes engaging? Do we spend a day? That's really up to the client. That's really up to how you guys connect and how it goes. There's no time that you spend on each of these phases. You may take 3 days just engaging with a client. You may take 1 minute. It really depends. And you can probably do all these four processes in one session, but don't jump to the next phase if you haven't completed the first one. So that's just a tip that I have for you guys. And you can see this as a staircase, but in the newer literature on motivational interviewing, they mention that engagement is ongoing. And we know that you always have to build rapport. Sometimes you say something that kind of ruptures that rapport, and then you have to go back to it. And that's okay. It has to look like a dance. It has to feel like a dance. When you're communicating with your clients, it has to feel like a dance. It cannot feel like you're arm wrestling. If you are, take a step back, say, what's going on and what should I do now? I hope you guys found value in the four processes of motivational interviewing, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of MI for Change. If you're ready to keep growing your motivational interviewing skills, I'd love to invite you to explore my MI Academy, where you'll find a full library of on-demand courses designed to help you put MI into practice with confidence. You can learn more at www.drmonicagilbert.com. Until next time, keep asking the questions that spark change.